We don't want to be in a situation, quite frankly, and this is not a jab at any particular entity, but we don't want to be in a situation where the media determines how people think. People need to determine how they think themselves. Well, at any rate, it was a difficult process, me realizing my dream of becoming a doctor. A lot of obstacles along the way, not the least of which the fact that my parents got divorced early on. That was devastating. Felt like someone had pulled the rug out from underneath you. You know, my mother was one of 24 children. Got married when she was 13. And she and my father moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit. He was working in a factory. Years later, she discovered he was a bigamist. Had another family. I remember telling that story at a graduation at the University of Utah. Nobody thought it was that strange. You see that? I offended somebody. Now, everybody knows they don't do that in Utah anymore, right? Now it's Texas. But at any rate, but obviously she thought that was pretty strange, so we moved from Detroit to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Multifamily dwelling, sirens, gangs. I remember seeing people lying on the street with bullet holes and stab wounds, waiting to die. Both of my older cousins that lived with them were killed. It's the kind of environment it was. I never anticipated that I would live to be beyond 25 years old. My mother was out working 2, 3 jobs at a time as a domestic because she didn't want to be on welfare. Even though she only had a 3rd grade education, she was very observant. And she noticed that no one she ever saw go on welfare came off of it. And she didn't want that lifestyle for herself or for us. And I'll tell you an interesting thing about my mother. Even though she had a very, very difficult life, she never developed what I call a victim's mentality. She never felt sorry for herself. And I think that was a good thing. Problem is, she never felt sorry for us either. You know, there was never any excuse you could give that was good enough for her. She always said, "Do you have a brain?" And if the answer to that was yes, then you could have thought your way out of it. It doesn't matter what John or Susan or Mary or anybody else did. And you know, the fact of the matter is, when someone won't accept your excuses, you start looking for solutions. And that was probably the best thing that she did for us. You know, when I think about people who were not excuse makers, I'm reminded of Chang and Ing Bunker, the original Siamese twins. They were born in Siam in the year 1811, hence the term Siamese twins. They were joined at the chest, something we call thoracopagus or xiphopagus. They were the ones who made Barnum and Bailey famous, traveled all over the world. Eventually, left the circus, came to this country, settled in the state of North Carolina, and became farmers, successful farmers, stuck to each other's chests, staring each other in the face 24/7, smelling each other's breath 24/7, not using that as an excuse. Can you imagine that? Nowadays, people hurt their little pinky and they want workman's comp for the rest of their lives. You know, these guys were amazing. And not only were they successful farmers, but they got married to 2 different women. And between them, no pun intended, they had 21 children. So you can see they were fairly creative fellows also. But amazingly enough, they lived until they were 63 years old, which is much older than most people lived back in those days. So what does that tell you about not making excuses? About just dealing with the situation as it is and coming up with solutions? You know, that's the way Dr. King thought. Forget the excuses and find a solution. Makes all the difference in the world. Well, you know, my mother felt that if she worked long enough and hard enough, eventually we'd be able to return to Detroit. After a few years, we were able to do so. And still in a multifamily dwelling with significant wildlife, but nevertheless, independent. I was a fifth grade student. I was the worst student you can imagine. I was what's known as the safety net. No one had to worry about getting the lowest score on a test as long as I was there. I always took that honor. And so, my classmates called me Dummy. That was my nickname. But you know what? I would get back at them because I loved to get people kicked out of class. And I was very good at it. Because what I would do is I would study my classmates. I would figure out what made them really angry. And then I would just irritate them until they were about to explode. But I would never push the last button to make them explode until we were in class and the teacher was nearby. And then I'd do it, they would explode, the teacher would kick them out. I'd say, yeah, this is great. Because I knew I wouldn't be the only one who didn't learn anything that day. Well, there was this one girl. She was Miss Goody Two-Shoes. Everybody remembers Miss Goody Two-Shoes in their class, right? Everything perfect, pristine, on time, so neat, makes everybody else look like a total jerk. And I said, boy, wouldn't it be great to get her kicked out of class? So I started studying her, but she was a tough nut to crack. I'll tell you, it was hard to figure out what made her angry, but I finally figured it out. And I had her going. I mean, the steam was coming out of her ears. She was about to explode, but I didn't push the last button. I waited till we were in class. And lo and behold, she sat right down in the desk in front of me. And I said, the Lord is good. And as the teacher approached, I pushed the last button. I started irritating her. But she didn't explode. She just calmly turned around. And she said, you and me on the playground at recess. So that didn't work out that well. I became a neurosurgeon and she became a professional wrestler. But, I did stop bothering people after that. But, I reminded myself of some of the students that I see today. I have a program at the hospital. I invite 800 students at a time. And I show them slides of what goes on in a medical teaching institution, research, the whole 9 yards. And then we talk about human potential. And at the end, I allow them to ask me questions. But sometimes I ask the questions. And I remember asking, how many of you can name for me 5 NBA players? Do you know virtually everybody could name 5 NBA players? I said, what about 5 Major League Baseball players? No problem. NFL, piece of cake. Movie stars, rap singers, no problem. I say, who could name for me 5 Nobel Prize winners? Out of 800, 10 hands went up. I said, leave your hands up because I'm going to call on one of you. All the hands went down. What does that tell you? And then I said, this is the information age, the age of technology. Who can tell me what a microprocessor is? Now, of course, they were all weary. So only one young man raised his hand. I called on him. He proudly stood up and he said, a microprocessor is a tiny processor. That was it. That was the extent of his knowledge. Extremely superficial. And it's funny, but it's tragic. Because this is the information age. This is the age of technology. And we are the pinnacle nation in the world. Number 1. On top. No competition. But you know what? We're not the first pinnacle nation in the world. There have been others before us. Ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, Great Britain. Number 1, no competition. Going to be there forever. Where are they now? What happened to each one of them? Same thing. They became enamored of sports, entertainment, lifestyles of the rich and famous. They lost their moral compass, and they went right down the tubes. And some people say that can't happen to us. But an honest appraisal would indicate that we are already in the process of that decline. And The real question, and this is a very serious question, and this is a Dr. King-like question, can we be the first pinnacle nation to learn from those who have gone before us and not make the same silly mistakes? Can we learn from their mistakes? Can we make a mid-course correction? Or must we inexorably continue down the path of self-destruction? That is a serious question. The answer rests within each of us and within our spheres of influence. Think about this. This nation, the United States of America, is special. Why do I say that? Formed by a bunch of ragtag militiamen who were able to defeat the most powerful empire in the world. You think we did that by ourselves? You think we did that with no help? Think about this. During World War II, nations of the world falling like dominoes one by one before tyrannical forces. Except for one thing. This country, the United States of America. A country with the ability to send its young men from the cities, the suburbs, the country to fight a war on two different fronts of the world. A country with the ability to send its young women into the factories to build more airplanes, tanks, and mortars than anybody could imagine. A country that with its determination and its industrial might changed the course of the world. That's who we are. This is the first pinnacle nation in the world that did not try to conquer everybody else and impose its will on everybody else and actually created better living standards for other people. Before this country came into existence, people were still pulling donkey carts around with hay in them, like they had done 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. Since this country has come into existence, man has walked on the moon. This country has made an enormous difference in the world. And when people tell you that the United States is evil, tell them to go jump in the lake. It is not an evil nation. It is a great nation. It has made mistakes. No question about that. And our duty is to examine the mistakes that we have made, just like I was talking about in surgery. We learn from the mistakes and we learn to do things better. This is the hallmark of civilization. We have the ability to lead the world with the way that we treat other people, the way that we treat those around us. You know, this educational thing, I got to think that if Dr. King were here today, he would be real concerned about it. Do you know in my hometown of Detroit, the high school dropout rate is 75%. It's about 50% here. And it's 50, 60% in lots of places all over the country. Can we afford that? Not when this country produces 60,000 engineers a year, 40% of whom are foreigners. China produces 392,000 engineers a year. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to see where that's going. We cannot afford to be losing these young people.